Hi, everybody. My name's Abigail. I am a network coordinator with Rethinking Economics USA. Um, I am so happy that you all have come here on a Thursday night. It's really great to see so many faces. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started just briefly talking about what Rethinking Economics is. Yeah, so Rethinking Economics is a network of students and academics working to rethink the teaching and practice of economics. If I could have the slide after the next one, please. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we are a network of students looking to rethink the teaching and practice of economics. For us, rethinking economics curriculum and the university is a really important juncture point for bringing about the economic system that we want to see in the world. That is an economic reality which prioritizes the well-being of people and planet, as opposed to profit or various measures of growth of profit. We have over 120 chapters around the world. We have 5 chapters in the US currently, with more on the way. And yeah, could I get the next slide, please? So the way for us that change in curriculum happens at university is through student organizing. So the first question that then comes to mind is that even possible? Is it possible for students to organize around changes to their education and be successful? And our answer is absolutely. It's been done before. There was really robust student organizing at university campuses across the US in every region in the late 1960s. They organized around protesting the Vietnam War, supporting civil rights, organizing that was happening in the South and elsewhere, organized in solidarity with those struggling against apartheid in South Africa. If you've ever heard of Earth Day, that's a result of students organizing around climate change and environmental health in the late 1960s. And they also organized around curriculum reform. You know, we wouldn't have Black and ethnic studies programs in this country without organizing that took place in the late 1960s and early 70s in this country. So a big part of our work at Rethinking Economics USA is dedicated to revitalizing student organizing in the US to this end. And if I could get the next slide, there's definitely a lot of action happening on this front. Just within the past year, we saw kind of the largest strikes of academic workers actually in US history. Some of you may have heard about graduate student strikes out in California, across the University of California college system. Those are a really exciting development in organizing to transform the university itself. And then if I could get the next slide, there are a few pictures here from organizing that centered around structural changes to the university beyond workers' rights. If you see in the lower left-hand corner, there was an occupation that took place at a small college in New England earlier this year, protesting racist organizational funds that the school was courting and receiving, and demanded more robust structures at the university for institutional equity and inclusion. And then in the upper left-hand corner is a picture of a really exciting win that happened within the last year at University of Barcelona, where students there organized around introducing a mandatory course about climate change that would be a requirement for all students to take. And so that was a really big win in terms of changing curriculum at university that took place just within the past year. So we know it's possible. There's precedent many decades ago, and there's lots of momentum currently at universities to change university structures so that the university can be an institution that is much more equitable, just prepares people to go out into the world and build the kind of economy that we'd like to see, because the economic relations of our world affect us all. So yeah, that's all that I have to say about Rethinking Economics USA. I'm going to hand it over to Kat.
Hey y'all, I am Kat. I use they, them pronouns. I'm with the Kentucky Student Environmental Coalition. I'm one of the state organizers. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work, and then we'll hop into some shared definitions after that. If I could get the next slide, that'd be amazing. Yeah, so Kentucky Student Environmental Coalition. We are a capacity building organization working to connect, amplify, and build youth leadership throughout Kentucky around environmental justice and collective liberation. And we're actually really excited. This is our 15th year doing movement work this year, so we're really excited about that and wanting to celebrate that. And yeah, so we believe in holding campuses, corporations, and governments not only accountable in maintaining the environment, but actually allowing ecosystems to prosper, right? Like we don't want to just have to survive, we want to thrive, right? And we take this approach because we know big industries hold more responsibility in our current crisis than the individual actions of everyday people. And the reason that we focus on youth organizing is because we believe young people are going to experience the biggest impacts of the decisions that are being made today around climate change. And for that very reason, we think that we need to not just be a symbol within these rooms, but actually have decision-making power at the table. And so while we mostly do work with campuses and universities because of this responsibility that they have, we do also work with youth-based community organizations as well, who aren't necessarily associated with higher education, just because we don't want that to be a barrier to young people who really want to get involved with community organizing, but are doing it through different means. So we try to support both. If I can get the next slide. So our approach, our work focuses on providing political education, leadership development training, and really a space for young folks to connect and create a sense of community with each other. And again, this is kind of where we start. We really see that building relationships is the building block of all of our organizing, of great organizing. And we do that by, building connections one-on-one with between members, building out political analysis and leadership development on top of that. And through that, we work to build power throughout the state. If I can get the next slide. And so what have we been working on recently? Over the last year, we have been doing some mutual aid support for the 2022 flooding in Eastern Kentucky. And we decided to work on this because we, one, are connected with those folks and want to show up for our community, but also because there's increasing climate disaster in our state, especially in areas that have a long history of extraction from industry. We've also been working to push for an end of new fossil fuel infrastructure by getting young folks connected with a local campaign to halt the LG&E pipeline that is being proposed in Bullitt County, Kentucky. And then after that, we are also working on rebuilding a lot of our youth delegate network after the height of the pandemic. And currently we represent Rise and Shine Bowling Green, which we have Daisy here today on our panel. Really excited about that. Morehead State, University of Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky University, Center College, Henry Clay High School, and are working to keep building out that network. So if you're from Kentucky and go to school here, we would love to connect with you afterwards. If I could get the next slide. And here are a couple photos from different events and actions that we've had. If I can get the next slide, that. Key terms. We really wanted to ground into a shared framework of understanding for some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Some people in the room might have experience with these concepts, with the words that we're using, which is really exciting. And also we want to make sure that there's room for folks who are totally new to this, which is also super exciting. I hope there's some folks here who, are just newer to these things and wanting to learn. So we wanted to start with defining divestment. If I can get that next slide. So what is a divestment? Divestment is a means of leveraging economic power to help bring about political, economic, legal, or social change, which we know are also all interconnected. It's about pulling money, talent, and public approval away from banks and financial institutions that invest in, say, fossil fuel infrastructure. That's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. And this devalues the fossil fuel industry and moves us towards alternative solutions. And so, again, we'll be talking about how this relates to fossil fuel and climate change, but it also spans beyond just this industry. It can also include things like divesting from private prisons. There's also a lot of divestment going on around Cop City right now, if y'all are familiar with that. In Atlanta. Students from a lot of different universities in Atlanta are actually demanding Woodrow Foundation, who's actually the largest funder of the Public Safety Training Center, and is also a really significant funder for Atlanta universities to divest from the Atlanta Police Foundation. So that's actually a really great issue to be following right now. And we actually have an article linked in a resource packet we'll be sending out afterwards about that. And also, I think an important thing to name about this is the history of the strategy. So the strategy of school divestment was actually inspired by the fight against South African apartheid in the 1980s. And some of these photos that we have here today, the top one is some Emory students protesting against Cop City, but the ones below are on the left. It's specifically this group called the Soweto Students Representative Council. And they're actually, their whole executive committee was arrested for their involvement because the government was actually trying to crack down on a lot of student uprisings because they saw how powerful the student organizing really was. And then also on the right, we have a photo of students protesting at Duke University, which I thought was also really exciting to add in since we have a student from Duke today who's going to be on our panel. So I'll pass it off to Abigail to talk about neoclassic economics.
Hi, everybody. So if I could have the next slide. A term that's going to come up a lot in this discussion is neoclassical economics. So we wanted to provide a little bit of an introduction to what we mean by that. Neoclassical economics is a school of economic thought. It's just one school. Depending on who you ask, there's anywhere from 9 to 12 schools of economic thought. But it's important to understand this particular one because it has dominated economic research, teaching, and policymaking since the 1970s. And there's a few key characteristics that have kind of led us to our current state of austerity politics, really widespread overarching defunding of public goods, particularly public education. And so some of those key characteristics are that in this particular form of economics, individuals are seen as rational, self-interested, utility maximizing actors, which is to say that in this school, the individual is the primary unit of analysis as opposed to groups or groups at different levels. Another key component is that the economy is seen as market exchanges. The definition of economy is reduced to just the study of market changes. And to give you a sense of kind of how narrow that is, some define the economy as all the processes that provide for human life. And so those are two very different definitions and necessarily impact what you view as important when you're making economic decisions in any sort of policymaking circle. And then finally, neoclassical economics is something that views markets as the most efficient way to distribute resources and to kind of maximize well-being. And so what's missing in all of this is often an understanding, a critical understanding of history. Neoclassical economics is usually power blind. It doesn't take into account why things are unequal at the outset of any situation that it is looking at. And so if I could have the next slide, why this is important is because neoclassical economics is something that does have such a wide reach. It does have such a wide span. And as I'm sure all of you have heard at some point, economics are given a lot of deference and authority in the realm of governance, government, any sort of political or economic decision making. Economists are seen as kind of the objective best authority to offer expertise in those areas. And so part of what we're arguing is that anyone can understand the economy. Anyone and everyone should be able to have a say in economic decision making because it affects all of us. So that's just a very, very brief overview. We'll definitely go into more detail later on, but that's just to kind of give you all a taste. So yeah, if we can just have the last slide up for anyone who's interested in learning more about CASEC or RUSA, this is where you can find us. Yeah, this is what we wanted to do to kind of give you all a sense of who we are, what we're hoping to talk about today, and why we felt that this was an event that was important to have, talking about how the university contributes to climate change in different ways, right? In its financial investments and in the education that it provides. So with that, we are going to introduce the panelists and transition there. Maybe we could stop sharing and kind of get the panelists up on Spotlight for everybody. While we are doing that, I will go ahead and introduce folks. So I'm going to start with, I think the first person on my screen is Anik. So Anik Sen is currently a student at Duke. He's been really involved in Regenerative Futures Lab, which is a member of the Transformative Systems Project at Duke, which is currently working to change the curriculum in economics and the public policy departments. He's also actively teaching a course for students by students aimed at kind of bringing about the type of curriculum change that Transformative Systems Project is working on, and also established the aforementioned research lab, which is very new, just established this year, I believe. It's called the Regenerative Futures Lab. So if anyone's interested, definitely give them a Google. They're doing some pretty exciting stuff. And then we have Daisy with us. Daisy Carter is a climate justice organizer, abolitionist, and founder of Rise and Shine, a mutual aid organization in Bowling Green, Kentucky. They've done previous work with the Sierra Club and the Sierra Student Coalition, and they were involved in a student movement for divestment at Western Kentucky University, I believe. And then finally, to round us out, Merle Schulken, who is currently an economics PhD candidate at UMass Amherst. Her research interests include concern what kinds of public policies can support the structural transformations needed for shifting to a low carbon economy. Before going to UMass, she completed a master's in Vienna and an undergraduate degree in the Netherlands. She also has some work experience in green finance. So someone who's very familiar with the ins and outs of neoclassical economics as well as other schools, and who can hopefully shed some light on that here today. So with that, we have promised a panel. We've talked at you for a while, and now we are going to deliver on that promise. So yeah, maybe Kat, you want to get us started off?
Yeah, so really excited about all the people that we have here today. What we wanted to do was start with an opening question for all the panelists, which is, in your view, how does the university contribute to climate change in either its financial operations or through the education it provides? I don't know who wants to start here, but anyone can just hop right in.
If you want, I can start. Always scared to go first. So thanks so much, guys, for inviting us. I think this is a very exciting panel. I'm super excited to talk about these things that I've been like grappling with for years now, basically since my undergrad. So just to give some context, I did an undergrad in sort of interdisciplinary social sciences, but chose a major in economics. And just like pretty much everyone who goes to university nowadays, that meant that my undergrad economics course was really mainly focused on neoclassical economics, and that was the only type of economics I was offered by my university. And it really it really put me in a bind. I had friends who took other social sciences. I was interested in environmental issues and equity concerns, and all the reasons why I wanted to study economics in the beginning were like wanting to change the world, super idealistic, like wanting to be politically active, wanting to understand why are things so messed up, what can we do about it? And what I got was the neoclassical model, which basically, told me that we're in the best possible world. And if there is something that we want to do, then maybe, it's a carbon tax. It really just top-down policies that, clearly weren't being implemented. And it left me so frustrated that was sort of the only perspective on economics, on the economy that I was getting in economics classes, and that I had to sort of go outside of economics to political economy within political science, to sociology, to finally find my way here to Amherst, where there is a greater diversity of economic thought, and where sort of schools of thought that were taught in regular economics programs until the 70s are still kept alive, and where people are doing really interesting critical research, and I think putting out great policy proposals, but also really being of use to like activists who are really trying to change the world. So that's just a little bit of background. So I will focus mostly on how is the university contributing to climate change through its economics education in the US context. For most people, that means taking a gen ed course in economics. For some people, business majors, economics majors, it means, getting taught neoclassical economics throughout your entire undergrad. And that's going to shape, how you see the world. But it's not just teaching, it's also the research that, is being put out there by economists that ends up in places like the Financial Times, The Economist, that ends up in policy. All these things are connected. And I think I will try to make the argument that they really limit both how we can make sense of how the economy works, how the capitalist economy works, and the sort of policy space we have to make changes within that system. But it also just limits how we understand the economy in a broader sense, as in provisioning systems we could be choosing to produce the goods and services that we need to survive, and provisioning systems that we might want to transition towards to better be able to address issues like climate change and inequity, racism, and so forth. So Abigail already gave a great introduction to what neoclassical economics is. Basically, think if you've ever taken a microeconomics 101 or macroeconomics 101 course, think back to that. It's basically the idea, you will probably remember this graph. We have an upward sloping supply curve and a downward sloping demand curve, and the price and the of a good and the quantity supplied in the economy is where these two curves interact. And then, we think about the economy basically, as Abigail said, in terms of market exchanges, where initial distribution of resources is taken as given, the wealth inequality, all that is taken as given. And our only concern, people's preferences, consumers' preferences are taken as given. And also the technologies that firms use for production are taken as given. And then our only concern as economists is studying, if we make certain assumptions, how are agents in the system going to choose to allocate resources through markets? And then we can show, because we're making a lot of assumptions that basically perfectly competitive markets are the best way of allocating resources, a given set of resources between a given set of actors with a given set of preferences. And thus, the main conclusion, unfortunately, oftentimes is that policy should not intervene, because as soon as policy intervenes in the market, it creates inefficiencies. So, famously, you will study why the minimum wage creates unemployment, why rent ceilings create, homelessness. And yeah, I think the main problems with this kind of approach is, as I said before, first of all, so I want to say clearly that we live in a capitalist economy, right? So it is important to study economics, I think, because there are sort of structural tendencies at play within capitalism. Like, we do have markets as the dominant way of allocating resources. So it's important to understand how markets work. It's important to have to get a sense of sort of what sort of dynamics they set off, how sort of rational firms and rational individuals would interact on markets. The problem is that neoclassical economics does not give us a very good rendering of how the capitalist economy works. And there are other schools of thought that we can talk about later, like post-Keynesian, Marxist economics, institutionalist economics, Austrian economics, that have, for now several hundred years, been thinking about how the capitalist system works, and that have come up with sort of competing explanations for what causes what. And I think it would just be important to give students a broader understanding of how different schools of thought have made sense of this system. Because the neoclassical school really offers a very benign view. It's all about, it's a beautiful model. It's very seductive when you study it, because it all kind of like solves itself. We always get to the best of possible outcomes. Things like unemployment are basically assumed to not be existing in the beginning, like at the outset of the model. We have no involuntary unemployment, and then we solve the rest of the model. That's just one example, right? So it's an economic school of thought that has come about in a time politically, which was in the late 70s and the first time after World War I, where policymakers needed justification for austerity policies. And that's why it is a model that, by its assumptions, will always solve for outcomes that tend to be bad for distribution, that tend to not look at unemployment outcomes a lot, that are really good for profit rates, and say that profit rates are the most important thing to bring about growth. So it's not a very good rendering of the capitalist economy with its, dangers and downsides, but it's also not a good, it doesn't give us a good grasp on how the economy in a specific historical instance, in a specific context, actually works. So the way you will study the economy as an econ student is that you will have these abstract models, and then you will go out there and you will just say, if we assume that everything works according to this model that I now in my head believe is really the best description of the capitalist economy, then we would expect to see these and these outcomes. You don't actually look at, how has corporate governance changed over the last couple of decades? What kind of incentives has that set for people in corporations that might be very different from how corporations were run in the 70s? You don't go out there and look at how many different forms of companies do we have? How do companies even make decisions and how they price things? Who they pay profits to? Like, we don't look at cooperatives. We don't look at mutual aid networks. We don't look at unpaid housework. We don't look at all kinds of things, considerations, group-based decisions that people are engaging in the real economy, in the system that is providing resources for, how we live. And this means that basically any form of group-based action, any form of activism, any form in which people are making sense of the capitalist economy, either resisting it, pushing back its expansion, or embedding it within, values, within social processes, trying to regulate it. All these things are basically assumed away in how we study economics. It's, professors will tell you that's sociology if you're interested in that. That's not economics. And really that's so sad, because those are the things that really shape how things work. So just to sum up, I don't want to take too much more time. I think the way we teach economics is we're teaching people a model that doesn't even describe the capitalist economy very well, because it's purposefully designed to be a benign, a very beautiful view of the capitalist economy, where we believe that markets by themselves can basically solve most problems that we have. And then on top of that, it's not enabling us to actually go out there and look at the economy as it really is. And in this sense, it is basically, on one hand, transhistoricizing capitalist economies as they unfortunately, work, giving people the sense that this is how it's always been, this is how it's always going to be. And it is erasing any form of activism, any form of pushback that is actually going on in the economy right now. And it's basically bringing about students that have been robbed of any sort of anger, miscontent, or experience with the real economy they had before going in to study this, and leaving them with a very, very limited tool set for policies to change the economy. So
Yeah, that was amazing. I think about like when I was first getting into community organizing work, not really wanting to touch economics at all, but like the older I get, the more I'm like, this is such a important like perspective to have and framework to have, and like it's really inspiring one to see just like how many steps you went through to like get to these forms of education, and also how passionate you are to like make it a lot more accessible and easy for other students to be able to like not have to jump through all those hoops to like get that kind of learning and education in this. Yeah, and I want to pose that question to Daisy and Anik as well. Yeah, in your opinion and your thoughts, how does the university contribute to climate change in either its financial operations or through the education it provides?
Yeah, I definitely I didn't even finish school, so I definitely am not coming here at like with the economist mindset. But like my background is in grassroots organizing and in mutual aid, and currently helping to curate survival programs which with an emerging organization called Survival Block. And so it is good to understand the ins and outs of how money moves, why it moves, because ultimately, it really does show what you value. And I think that financial investments alongside fossil fuel industries, and the banks that also uphold them, it's really showing, that you're going the easy way out, you're going the way that, ultimately is hurting communities, across the global South. When we think about climate change, we're here in the States, we're just now starting to feel a lot of those effects. But if you're living in the global South, if you're, definitely like in the UK, like these are, climate change is already there, and wiping out communities. And so, yeah, like, I don't want to take up too much time, and also because, but yeah, it really shows, what universities value, and show that they don't value their students, and they don't value the communities that they're in, and that they're supposed to be stewarding and helping to, bring life to, and stuff like that. And so I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that, Anik.
No, I 1000% agree with that. I think especially within a lot of universities these days, economics is just kind of taught as one school of thought rather than like being a variety of school of thoughts. Like I didn't even know that there were 11 other schools of thought. So just thinking about the way in which we frame how we think about the economy and giving students the choice to be able to like pursue different types of thinking in that realm is really important. And I think like the way that the university uses its financial capabilities in terms of not only like the investments it has in its endowments, but also like the type of faculty it hires and the type of like clubs and like research labs that like the university supports on campus. We've been really fortunate at Duke to have funding to be able to do kind of transformative research to look at different types of solutions towards like building a happy city was our theme this year. And so being able to have space on campus for students to envision those types of thought and put time and effort towards having those conversations, I think is really important for large scale like action.
Yeah, I always think about if you don't have the space to dream it, it can be so much harder to even know that those possibilities are out there. Yeah. Abigail, did you want to hit us with that next question?
Yeah. So I think This question is maybe initially directed at Merle. You touched on some of how neoclassical economics has shaped what solutions are proposed for climate change. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. What kind of policies does neoclassical economics suggest when we're faced with the issue of having to mitigate the effects of climate change and prevent future damage to the environment? And how has neoclassical economics kind of shaped the almost the political imagination of what most people consider possible or plausible in terms of, um, you know, fighting and ending climate change to whatever extent we can?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks. So, um, first of all, how is the relation between sort of the economy and the environment portrayed in neoclassical econ? So in the neoclassical economics classroom, as I experienced it at least, it was basically absent. So all we talked about was this like abstract model that, again, they propose is the best way to understand capitalist markets. The only time the environment came in was as something called a negative externality. So that's basically some form of damage that is affecting the community as a whole, but that individual actors engaging in markets do not factor into their decisions. And so if that's sort of how you view, like the environment is sort of outside of the economy, but we don't want to pollute it too much because that could have harmful consequences, either people just well-being, but also on the economy, like on sort of future capital accumulation in the future. And so we might want to mitigate that. And then the way you would mitigate that is you try to internalize the externalities. So you don't change the structure of the economy qualitatively. You still believe that markets are the best way of allocating things, profit optimizing firms are the way we should, competing with each other are the way we should, organize production, which is of course, not how production in the real world for the most part actually functions, but that's sort of the ideal that you will then go out and try to implement into the world. Now, the only thing you change is that you levy a tax on emissions, for example. So for example, a carbon tax, and then the idea would be that all the economic actors are now forced to take into account the damage that their consumption or their production is having on the environment. And so they will innovate a way to better technologies that don't have that sort of emission anymore. That's the only way in which sort of climate change was discussed in the classroom. Now, in terms of and that's also sort of the policy space that would limit people's view towards, thinking that the economy just is how it is. What are sort of like small screws we can turn to internalize these damages. Now, in terms of like actual policies, the dark truth is that neoclassical economics, in terms of like its journal publications, in terms of its research, has done very little research on climate change. Nicholas Stern has written about this, if people are interested. Basically, for example, the Quarterly Journal of Economics has 0, which is the most cited journal in economics, 0 publications about climate change thus far. Which is unbelievable. But sort of the most famous approaches are on one hand, William Nordhaus, who basically used a cost-benefit analysis to calculate that the optimal rate of global warming by 2100 is 3.5 degrees Celsius, which defies what any natural scientist would tell you. And then sort of there's been a backlash to that. Now there's Nicholas Stern, for example, who talks about it in terms of market failure externalities and who proposes a carbon tax. I think just very briefly, the main problems with this stuff is, what I said before, you only look at market exchange, you take everything else as given, and you believe that the economy works. It's just like these profit maximizing firms, individuals. One thing you take as given, for example, is consumer preferences. So the problem with that is, if I live in a city where everyone drives with their car, maybe I have a preference to drive with my car, right? Like me as an individual, the way I will like communicate my preferences to the market is by buying a car. What the model is not able to grapple with is that if I and all my neighbors got together and we said, actually, we're just driving cars because everyone else is driving a car and because we don't have a good public transport system, let's pool money together, let's create a great public transport system, then my preferences would maybe change, So like, if you take everyone's preferences as given in the economy as it is now, then action on climate change will always be costly. it will always be something that reduces the well-being of people, because we are living in the best of possible worlds right now, right? And so basically, not only does it limit us to thinking about climate mitigation in terms of just a tax or a subsidy, but it also fundamentally makes us think that mitigating climate change is, will always come at a cost to someone. And I think, these are sort of two things I would point out that are problematic.
Yeah, thank you for that, Merle. Anik or Daisy, I'm wondering if you all have things to add to that.
No, I think that captured really well the lack of discussion there is about environment within economics. It's always abstract. I laughed when I heard negative externality, because that's just the only context in which you hear negative things about like neoclassical economics, and we can control for the negative externalities through kind of these policies that use market-based ideology. But neoclassical economics never portrays or never gives you the opportunity to discuss kind of systematic, like changes in the systems that we use in our economy. And I think that's kind of really what's been lacking.
I think something, and this may be related, but not, but I'm thinking about our response after disaster hits and how we're scrambling to like repair our economy. And we have such a focus on the markets instead of, factoring in what we need to do to mitigate less damage to our environment in the long run. And also, if you're so worried about capital, make sure that people can actually, produce that for you. Yeah, that's where my head went. Because you don't see any policies that are put in place to like upkeep the economy that keeps in mind climate change and that keeps in mind those impacts. Because disasters are costly, and it's always a thing of like, oh no, look at what we had to pay for, boo-hoo, and people would then come swoop in, invest in false solutions, and like, do all that type of stuff. But it's never, just investing and doing in the thing that you need to do to make sure that you don't need to pay extra in the future. It's kind of like common sense, and so yeah.
Yeah, I really like that point, Daisy, because I think there's definitely a tendency when you're only looking at markets and your priority is profit maximization, and your only, your main unit of analysis is kind of this very rational individual who's outside of social and political forces. It leads to a situation where it is rendered rational to not put investments into prevention or into any kind of resiliency, instead to focus on maximizing efficiency in the moment and kind of keeping that increasing for as long as possible until we hit a disaster, and then we deal with that then. So I really like that point. I think that's something that also is kind of an epistemological piece of this that deeply affects how we think about climate change and climate disaster, and in some ways produces or exacerbates climate disasters when we do have climactic weather events, because we haven't put the effort in ahead of time to ensure that there is resiliency built into our economies. Kat, do you want to do the next question?
Yeah, I also just want to add really quickly, I feel like we saw this within the pandemic too, of like how our current economic system says like, oh, we can't actually house people, oh, we can't like stop evictions. But then when this happened, we saw that like, oh, actually that is a possibility. So just wanted to add that. But yeah, so wanting to jump into the question of, I think this, would definitely could be directed at Daisy. But what can students do to disrupt university contributions to climate change? And like, how does this intersect with what we've been talking about? And also, like, why does it matter to be thinking about how the university contributes this and what they can be actively doing?
Yeah, I mean, it really just comes down to like you have to organize, and it's not, we really shouldn't be looking at organizing as like singular, it's not all just like standing outside somewhere and like yelling and screaming and stuff like that. It takes education and coordination and research, and students have to be willing to commit to taking that time to understand where your university, and this doesn't have to just be like big universities, like people like universities that have really like large endowments, like I'm talking like billions of dollars, or I mean, wherever you're going, it's your right to know where that university is getting their money from, and where they're spending it, and where they're spending your tuition money, because that shows up in your housing programs, in the way that you get your food, recycling on campus, all of that contributes. And so yeah, like just being really diligent and serious about that. I think that students, especially if you're not paying for your education, which that's like low, I don't know, I try doing that. That's like an old school way nowadays, like people going to school and going to work. If you're students nowadays, I feel like are so dissociated from those the financial operations, the way that like the university works in general, and the university's contribution or lack thereof to the community that they live in. A lot of students are going to university and then leaving where they like leaving that town that they attended, leaving that country, and that leaves, that doesn't hold universities accountable. You going to that university and you giving them your tuition money is your investment, and that's the way they look at it. They don't look at like you are capital to them, you are an investment. And so it's your job to know where that's going. And I think of this was before I was like really involved in the Sunrise Movement, but the Sunrise Movement hub here in Bowling Green, Kentucky, when it was still active, tried to help revitalize a 2013 fossil-free campaign that was happening on Western Kentucky's campus. Here in Bowling Green, like they have like a whole like power plant going on. There's the recycling going on, but they're cutting back on sustainability efforts, and so it's just kind of like it's a problem, and with the city kind of being smaller, it's a smaller economy, it only runs on a few things. And so yeah, those students went ahead and interrupted meetings that people that were leaders of the foundation, of the university's foundation, were part of, pulling aside the president of that foundation to talk about like, what are your investments? Where is our money going? And they don't give them any answers. They don't give them any answers. And that's unfortunately like the most frustrating part is, like you're not, you can't like curb the conversation the way you want it to go, which is why research and, looking at public record is so important. And so I just really like, be consistent in your organizing, please. We have like object permanence issues nowadays. Maybe it's something in the water, but like Nick, you know what I mean? It's just like, if you don't stay on it, like if you don't show people that like you're really serious and that what you're talking about, they're gonna think that you're stupid, because you're interrupting their money, you're interrupting the regular way of things, you're interrupting the system. And so, be consistent. Find public platforms that have W-9 information, tax information of your universities. The SEC, they have an online database that you can look, especially for like universities that have like really large endowments. See what your university is invested in. This is public record because you're supposed to know that. So go do research and go get your friends and go talk about it and go do something about it, really.
Yeah, I really loved your point, especially on how oftentimes like university officials don't take us seriously. And I think part of that is also because we're young. And it's like, yeah, I mean, there's so many young organizers that I've known and that we have here today that have like done such diligent work to show, how the university is acting and what they need to be actually doing. So. And wanted to open that question up to Merle and Anik.
I think Dave captured a lot of great things. I think the only thing I would add, like as a student now, like don't be afraid to talk to the people that teach you, and like talking about what goes into like what you're being taught, and advocating for other types of knowledge being taught is super important. I think a lot of the times you'll probably still run into some similar issues of people looking down on you or not telling you that you don't know what you're talking about. But I think having like belief in yourself that like you have the right to be taught the way you want to be taught, and like your tuition is an investment for the school. If anything, you're the customer and the customer is always right. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would just add, I think there's great ways to combine sort of efforts for curriculum reform with the things that Daisy was talking about, because in the end, I think, also like now I'm a TA for undergrads, so I'm like on the other side of the relationship now, and I just feel like the only way how we can teach like basically democratic citizenship and teach all the things and skills you need to have to be able to defend your rights, to be a active member of the community in the future, a critical informed member, to really bring about change. The best way to teach is to have your course content reflect something that the students are actually experiencing in their real life. And I think, Daisy, you're so right that nowadays college is so expensive and people are under so much pressure to get a good job right afterwards that they just cram as much courses as they can into their college time. They don't want to spend time, some of them are hesitant to spend time doing activism, and in a way they're like distancing themselves from the real world that they are about to enter after they finish college. And so I think once you have a group together that's interested in looking into, for example, how your university is contributing to climate change, I mean, it could be good finding, as Anik said, a professor who's maybe interested in helping change that, but then also maybe that professor can help you self-educate yourself. If you're not learning what you want to learn in your classes, maybe you can have a reading group in the evenings. And maybe you're not going to find a professor, if you want to learn about economic things, in the economics department who can offer you really interesting resources. I mean, it's a good place to start, but look into political science, look into sociology, see if there's anyone there who researches the economy from outside of economics, and see what kind of resources they can give you. And then I think, Rethinking Economics is doing great work. And I know that they're working on, for example, a student-led course starting next year that is sort of a course that students could teach to each other about critical thought about the economy, about capitalism, and about what to do about it. So I think there's great ways to like combine activism with education reform, because key to activism is educating yourself, as Daisy said. And so I think yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this in the chat really quick, but thinking of other resources where we can be learning, I wanted to throw in, there's this really great course called Economics for Emancipation that goes a little bit deeper and is actually where Rethinking Economics and CASEC met in the first place. And so they just launched it as a free resource online, and highly recommend folks look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Kat. If you haven't checked out that resource, I would really encourage y'all to do it. It's a it's a great project, and it's something that you can engage with even if you have very little time. They've set it up so that it's very accessible for a wide range of people. So I definitely recommend that. So the next question I have, I'm kind of going to add to. So um, it would be great to know what are some alternative ways to understand the relationship between capitalist economies, or between the economy and the environment. Merle, you talked about the environment being seen as outside of the economy. But I wonder also if we could broaden it to kind of include what are some alternative or what are some ideas and foundational aspects of kind of this democratic citizenship that has been brought up that we feel are missing in university education, and what would we want to be there instead? What would we want to be included in economics or social science courses more broadly, that better prepares us to do the work of disrupting university contributions to climate change and building people to have capacity and resiliency to do that, as well as the political imagination to think outside of what's immediately visible as possible. So I realize that's a very broad question. Yeah, if I'm going to open it up to anyone who wants to kind of take a first stab at that, go for it.
I can take a stab. My recent qualm these days with undergraduate education is how individualistic it is. And I think that's a product of how individualistic our economy is set up to be, and the focus of the individual in the economy. And I think like you learn differently when you're working with other people and when you're asked to like talk about forming an economy, or thinking about the way in which like we live in a community with each other. The best way to do that is by working in relation with each other. So like just this past semester of like working in a lab that like really focuses on students being the drivers of their own education and pursuing like kind of the things that they want to do. I think it's just paid dividends in challenging like the norms of what education looks like, and like rather than writing a paper or like having to like present knowledge that you've been taught, you're now investigating like what it means to like be a citizen in this world and what you want that to look like as a student. And so I think undergraduate education needs to empower students more, to take control of their education and provide guardrails for them to pursue that without kind of indoctrinating them into what they think students should believe.
Yeah, so just on the, I guess what economics education could do, or political economy education. So I think, yeah, kind of like going off what Anik just said, I think there's two ways in which economics can prepare students for the future, and that actually like also coincides with sort of the two ways in which I think we should be engaging with our economy right now in the face of climate breakdown. And so one is, I think, teaching students how capitalist systems work, because the reality is that we do live in capitalism, and even though not everything in the economy runs in a perfectly model specified way, there are undoubtedly tendencies underlying things that cannot just be understood by looking at specific institution, what is one specific firm doing or so, but we do have to look at this. We do have to build models to some extent. I just don't think that the neoclassical models are the right ones. But for example, post-Keynesian economics. So I would really encourage people the sort of economics or the sort of understanding of the capitalist system that is, for example, underlying the Green New Deal is in many ways post-Keynesian economics rather than neoclassical economics. So, some things about it are, it doesn't take the assumption that there is no involuntary unemployment in the economy is given. It doesn't, believe that, money is kind of like gold, like just out there, but, it very actively looks at what the central bank is doing and can be doing, and it has a much more open view of sort of, how investment works and how growth is the result of investment rather than seeing, savings as the result of growth. This is all very technical stuff, but I would like invite people who are into economics to look into other schools of economics to get a better understanding of how capitalism works, to then get a better understanding of what kind of things we can do within the system, within capitalism, to change how things are. So, as I said, Green New Deal is a great example. I think it's totally reasonable to come out of college wanting to go into policy, wanting to go into business, wanting to sort of operate within that system. And for that, you need a good understanding of, the breadth of policy that is actually at our disposal for influencing things, for example, scaling up investment in green things. The other side is, so I do think, we need, like what Anik was saying, guardrails, like you need someone to teach you this kind of stuff. You're not just going to like know this by yourself, you don't just know this from your experience in the capitalist economy. The other thing, however, is that we need to better understand how the economy is embedded in real world systems, how the economy actually works in specific instances, the diversity of types of firms that we have, the diversity of forms of provisioning that we already have, that are in some ways maybe foreshadowing a system beyond capitalism, that maybe is a system to come, or that are foreshadowing a sort of more regulated form of capitalism, like a more like social democratic form of capitalism, where we have more, where sort of non-market institutions are more important, where like your basic well-being is maybe assured not through markets. And then we leave markets, like a very specific role of like incentivizing innovation in specific areas, for example. And I think for that, we need to combine the economics education with other social sciences. So sociologists are looking at real world systems of production and provisioning. And, and this sort of prepares you for all kinds of roles where you're trying to change, the system that we're in. So you're not going into the system, but you're trying to like challenge it. You might be blocking the building of a pipeline because you realize that, that's not something that just, is best for all and will help us, green eventually, but you realize that capitalism will always be about growth, will always be about destroying the environment, unless, and how the only reason why it's not doing that is that it's always embedded in systems where people are saying no, like I do not choose to value things in this way. I do not choose to obey, this logic that the system is giving me, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but these are sort of the two ways in which I think political economy education can prepare you for different roles later on in life. And I think, the university needs to give you both of these sort of educations, and should also ideally, help you find ways in the here and now as a student at your university to already practice both of these things, critically understanding how is capitalism leading to my university being underfunded, what are the real constraints that my university is under, and what are sort of like big political changes I need to be working towards to help that. But also, how can we push back in the here and now? We don't have to accept everything that we're given from the outside as a university. We as students don't have to accept explanations of, I'm sorry, there's no money for this, because if we accept, then capitalism will just do what it wants with us, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Daisy, did you want to add anything?
I feel like I was gonna save this for another question for later, but I think I was just really thinking about where I think when we talk about like the economy and like leaving college, we're trying to think about like policy, how we're going to tackle it from like the big top, but business and like other business models I think are really important And I think that universities should invest in, new educational programs, or, new curriculum surrounding new business models, that can help curb the economy, into a way that, works for everybody. And, just thinking about like cooperatives and gardens and, just, other not for profit or for profit, free stores, it's just stuff like that, things to disrupt the market, is a great way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, just one thing I wanted to kind of put in here is like we've talked so far both about the university really not doing right by people who live right next to its physical location and the communities in which it's located. And also kind of what's come out of the answers to this, I think, is also that undergraduates, but any university student has the ability to affect their university. You know, we've kind of thrown around that students are a product in which the university invests in, but they're also in many ways a consumer, a customer. And so undergrads in particular have this really unique position which they can leverage of being both the product of the university and a consumer of the university. And so I think that's definitely a point around which students at universities across the US can work to make some kind of change. Part of that also, I think what I hear and what you're saying, Merle, and Anik as well, is that the university is a site in which it's valuable to struggle, in which, kind of, I think often the general sentiment among students is, I'm at university, this isn't the real world. Once I'm out in the real world, I'll be dealing with real world problems. And the whole time, if you are paying attention in your studies, everything that you're looking at is related to these really big problems at really big levels, and it can all feel very overwhelming. But I think kind of what's being said here is that we need change at every level, in every corner, among every group, in every, class and corner of our society. And so, about a 15th of the US population is currently in university. If a 15th of people in the US are all working to make the university a place that is more equitable and works to stop the destruction that is leading to climate change, that's a very sizable portion of the population. And so wherever you are is an important place to make change and to work to change power relations in that area. And so I just kind of wanted to bring out those two things that I felt like were being said here. Kat, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, so I was a sociology major, and I think just thinking about like the research that was being presented, while like a lot of it was great, it also felt really disconnected from like the communities that were around us. It felt very extractive sometimes, of like, I'm going to work with this community and, like, I'll have this relationship for this research project, but then there's actually nothing beyond that. And so I think that for me, I'm thinking about like, one, how much can change with that. I think you said 15%. Was that the number you threw?
No, it's not quite that large, but
Okay.
It's like 15th of.
Yeah, either way, a lot of people, one, can be changing within the university, but then if we're actually building like more robust relationships and ties with all of the folks that are in the same city, are the city next door, are within our state, how can that also ripple out into an even bigger impact that we can have? Because I do think universities have really great resources, and that's also not to say every professor is like that. I've met many people within universities that have had, 15 long year relationships with the people that they're doing research with. But like that should be the model, and that should be like how, the standard for what we're setting for the interactions that we have between these two places. And, even like, so I graduated, and how there's some similarities between the university organizing, but how much of a learning curve there was from being in that kind of like power dynamic, and knowing who exactly the players were, who the decision makers were, and then having to go through a huge learning curve of like, who holds power within, our state government, our city government, who are the people that influence them, all of that. And just, yeah, I think there's a way for us to also like be preparing people for, for organizing also beyond the university as well, and preparing people to continue that work beyond, and yeah, so that's kind of where my head was at. And then the other thing that I was thinking about too, which we wanted to ask you all was, we're talking about this, we're talking about like empowering more students, building more relationships, creating change in all of these different places, and how it's really necessary in like all spheres. And thinking about, the university in so many ways have invested in these industries that are perpetuating a capitalist system, perpetuating a way of life that actually doesn't support us. And Daisy, I think you started to hit on this, but like, are there other, we've talked about some other economic models, but like, are there other ways that the university could be reinvesting that money into, programs, just different things that actually benefit people and the environment, bridges that connection, doesn't see it as separate or individualistic. And yeah, just wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think definitely, I'd love to see, like divestment is a massive action that needs to happen. I would really love to see our universities participate in a solidarity economy, which is kind of like the new hot like buzzword rolling around. But it really kind of like cropped up, in the 80s and the 90s, with some struggles that have been happening, in the global South, in Latin America, throughout Europe, and, these places that, obviously have so many different power relations, different economies, moving towards that socialism, but it getting too what's the word? Authoritative or whatever it is, demanding, just really bad. just not good. And so yeah, based on those conditions of these people, how do we share our resources, gift economies, how to share skills and knowledge with one another in a way that benefits all of us, and it benefits the planet, and we're moving in a way that is ecologically sound. There is a climate change is going to keep happening, so how is the earth, and how are we going to adapt to that? And yeah, I would love to, instead of really investing that relationship in fossil fuel industries, and with others that help fund, really trying to reorient that relationship with the community that they're in, and the students. I think that there's so many different ways that we could look into participating in a solidarity economy by having universities look into how they may be able to contribute to community trust funds, how they maybe be able to, you know, provide land for people where it's affordable, where people actually have can participate and have ownership of their land, and you know, so that people have housing and food and you know, it's there, it's permanent. You know, even things like yeah, different business models, educating people on what other alternatives are out there, other schools of thought, and yeah, creating programs that you know, really help kind of grind that in, and programs that help people connect to the communities that they're in, and research. I think, you know, obviously, you know, advocating and investing in green building, that's going to be good for everybody. And I think in smaller ways too, you know, like creating solidarity based, you know, programs like community fridges for their students, you know, community gardens, student carpooling, you know, sustainability programs, composting. I mean, like it's gonna have to take, like Abigail said, all of the levels to make sure that money is flowing where it needs to go, you know. And yeah, that's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah, I really love all the things you raised, Daisy. I would say, like, to sum it up for me, if I put myself back into the shoes, obviously I never went to undergrad in the US, but you know, if I tried to imagine like being an undergrad in the US, what are the things you could mobilize around? I mean, apart from all the things that you said, I would say curriculum reform, any class you see that you feel isn't, you know, is portraying the economy in a way that, you know, is not critical, that is portraying the status quo in a way that is not critical, that is not enabling you to become, you know, an emancipated citizen. You know, pushback, like seek the conversation with the professor. Yeah, sometimes it's just a lack of knowledge, you know, like people have, unfortunately, since the 70s been trained within economics, exclusively within neoclassical economics. And I've had professors in my undergrad who were very nice and wanted to teach us other things, but didn't know. So point them to the right resources. Maybe they want to integrate some things in their classes. If not, seek people in other social sciences, you know, seek that some professor that you have a connection to, and then get them to, you know, either, you know, push for change in the department in terms of the course offering, or if that's not possible, student-led courses, educate yourself, you know. I mean, sometimes people say, like, you know, you're only going to learn the things that those in power want you to learn. I think that's too cynical. I learned a lot of great things in university that, you know, really made me a critical citizen, but to some extent, you know, sometimes there's just a limit where you can go, and then you have to go towards self-education. So get together with others around you, try to educate yourself. And then yeah, and then in terms of like divestment, you know, yeah, like look at where your university is putting their endowments. I mean, they have an interest in earning a profit, which is understandable given how university funding is being squeezed by the state. And so, you know, that it makes sense that they want to earn a profit. We are in a capitalist economy, but there are other ways to do that. You know, push them, even if they don't want to divest, push them to push those that manage the university's money, the asset managers, to play an active role in the boardroom, voting in favor of shareholder resolutions that push the companies that they're invested in to be more green, be more sustainable, pay better wages, you know, don't bust the union. Like there, I mean, you can use like your ownership in the big corporations out there that, you know, your university has as a voice in those corporations, you know. And so obviously putting money out of things is one way, but also, you know, you can't divest from everything if you still want to make a profit. You know, you can't probably divest from all corporations. So the ones that you do stay invested in, you know, push your university to take an active stance, right? Yeah, and then finally, I mean, Daisy already talked about all the great ways in which university can become more involved in the local community. I think also, you know, a lot of our universities are really driving up housing prices in their areas, and there's no need. Like, you know, use some of your endowment money to build a new graduate student dorm, to build a new you know, housing for your undergrads. Don't be like a negative externality in your own community, in the stupid neoclassical word, right? But you know, like look at all the ways in which your university this is just a social example. I mean, Daisy mentioned all the great environmental ways in which our university is like, having negative, but use that as a practicing ground for understanding all the levers you can pull to be a positive force in the world. And then I think it will get you really far afterwards when you're trying to do that in your community, in your private life. So.
Yeah, the last thing I just want to add is don't be afraid to have conversations with other students. The things that you're thinking probably are also being thought by other people, and all it takes is just one person to start a discussion. And it's discussion among students where like activism and organizing begins.
And to add on to that, talk to your professors, talk to your faculty members, talk to them, because they're mad too, because their money is paid by the endowment that they're using to do all this other stuff. So they definitely have more things that they want to tell you, and I'm sure that they're already doing their own personal research into these issues and what's going on, because like they're nerds just like all of us. They're just older, talk to them. They want to talk to you. When we were doing anytime that we did like any type of Earth Day rallies here in Bowling Green with the Sunrise Movement, especially when they were doing the Divest campaign, they got in contact with professors and people that were able to provide them like real-time information, because a lot of that research it's not around sometimes, so yeah, professors and faculty members are really good resources too.
And just real quick, also link up with students from other universities. So like it can be really easy if you're struggling to set up a movement, looking at what other schools are doing. Like in my undergrad, Rethinking Economics was a branch that we had at our school, but we were meeting up a lot with the other universities in the Netherlands that also had a Rethinking Economics school, would organize things together, get really cool guest speakers together. And so like try to link up with movements outside, not just other university movements, right? Also like political movements, if there's like a canvassing going on, like if one of the local parties is doing something that you think is cool, try to get those connections beyond your university going, because that can also help with consistency once you graduate. Because I think it's tough, like you're only going to be there for 4 years, you're stressed. Like you want to build an organization that will survive you, right? So then it can help to have these structures that are bigger than just your school, to give like incoming students the resources that they need, especially now after the pandemic. I think so many things just like died with the people who left. So I think there's just a lot of like rebuilding work to be done to create lasting structures once again.
Yeah, 100%. Have conversations with anyone, even people who you think are unlikely allies. More people are frustrated with the things you're feeling than you probably think at first. And it's often said that any sort of large social movement or big change starts with conversations. Just one conversation about your frustrations or the problems you're seeing. So definitely echo what everyone has said here. We are drawing to a close of the event. Really appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Hopefully you enjoyed. I think we are at our proposed ending time, but I do want to leave some space for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So if you could either type those into the chat or raise your hand, maybe we could have 1 or 2 people just say their question, and then the panelists can respond once we have both of those. I would also really encourage you to take a look at the resource pack that we've put in the chat. That's a compilation of resources to learn more about what we've talked about here in terms of education. If you're looking for instances of successful curriculum reform, I would definitely encourage you to check those out. There's a lot of really great resources there, so definitely look that through if you can. So, and thank you to the panelists for your brilliance and contributions, and it was really great to hear from everybody.
Thanks for organizing this, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone. This was great.
Thanks,
y'all.